So, why should you care about the Ferrari Luce? It's a $650,000 car that most of us are never, ever going to buy. I'm Jason Voiovich. I'm an innovation timing expert, and I want to show you in this video how pretty much the entire commentary online is wrong and how to prevent you from making the same types of mistakes when you're thinking about your inventive or innovative idea. So let's get into it now. All right, this is the Ferrari Luce, L-U-C-E in Italian. That C is a CH sound. So it's got not the gull wing doors, but opposite opening doors like those cabs in the UK, kind of like those. This is the vehicle itself, which has been unceremoniously compared to a toaster. I think that's a little bit mean. It's kind of mean to toasters. That Smeg toaster is really nice. I like that one. This one, if you look at the interior, okay, I kind of get it. I get why I've seen nicer toasters than this, but in Ferrari's defense, they wanted to have not just the screen that a Tesla would have, but actual physical buttons to give more of a tactile experience. That's neither here nor there. Unlike most Ferraris, I live in probably the Ferrari capital of the United States in Naples, Florida, where there are more Ferraris per capita than pretty much anywhere else. And I can tell you that I am surprised that A, people can get into one, and B, that people can get out. So this one definitely seems a little bit more user-friendly for a lot of the folks that I see in Ferraris, which are usually older men and older women. I'm surprised they can get into these things at all. So I think for that type of buyer, this might actually be sort of appealing. But here's the point. We're not here to talk about the aesthetics of the car. What's important is when they launched this car, what happened? And this article here from Motor Biscuit, there is such a thing called Motor Biscuit. We're at that point in the internet life now where Motor Trend and Car and Driver have given way to Motor Biscuit, be that as it may. Ferrari's electric future hits turbulence as stocks drop over $5 billion after the reveal. Here's a little bit of a better picture of the car. This was published a few days ago. I'm recording on June 1. This was published on May 27th, so about 4 days ago. And this one, a couple of details. According to a report by Car Wow, Ferrari stocks did pretty well last week, hitting a high of $358 or 266 pounds at the close of markets. However, right after the unveiling, price nosedive to $336, fell further to $329 and change by 5:30 GMT. That's about an 8% drop, and that's where they get this $5.3 billion or 4 billion pounds number. What you have to understand is that sounds dramatic, and it is dramatic. No stock wants to drop 5%. I know enough CEOs to know that's true. But here's the thing. We're not talking about how Ferrari lost $5 billion in sales. What we're talking about is market capitalization. That is the number of shares of all shares of Ferrari outstanding times the value per share. So when you think about that and you divide the 5 billion by the 336, that's what we're talking about. This is not real money. Obviously, stocks are real money. They can be converted into real money, but they are not a sense of what the car is actually selling. Stocks are a matter of how investors feel the car will be doing in the future, the car brand or the company will be doing in the future. That's all. Here's what I find is interesting. The first lesson I can give you on time is always pull out the trend line. Always look chronologically longer than the time frame that's being talked about. In this case, we're talking about a single day drop. And what the author in this case is doing, Motor Biscuit, remember that. But this is very common out there. I've seen all kinds of commentary just like this. They are trying to assign a drop in a stock price to a particular event. Now, obviously that sounds logical, but let's take a look and let's spread out the timeline a little bit. It's an important chronological way to think about time and a tool you must use as you're thinking about your own invention. Here is Ferrari's stock price. today, this is June 1, just a few minutes ago, their stock ticker is RACE, which is a pretty great stock ticker if I'm being honest. But take a look at what happened. It seems like, well, stock price seems higher today. Well, here's that May 27th where it was low. Look at what's happened in that time. Stock prices increased pretty dramatically. Seems like it's made up all that lost ground. Let's take a look at 1 month ago. Looks like there have been similar dips down here on May 5th. No news there. Even lower on May 15th. And then a run up right before. And here's the announcement right there, May 26th. Stock price lost this $5 billion, which seems like it had just run up $7 billion and dropped $5, and over the last few days has recovered all of that lost ground. Let's pull out 6 months. Interesting here where, okay, we're a little down from our peak, but there certainly isn't anything really critical to know about the stock price as it relates to this vehicle. So what you need to be thinking about as you see commentary online about your market category, whatever your invention is or your innovation is, always take a look at the longer view. It is really critical to understand what's happening as far as the broader picture over time so that you don't get wrapped up into the urgency of the moment and make a mistake on thinking that because something happened today, that is the trend line. Never confuse an event for a trend line. Really critical. So this is a nice way you can take a look at it. If you buy stocks, you already know how to do this. But most innovators and inventors aren't thinking about this in terms of their own product lines or their own invention. You need to be thinking more temporal than you are. And the easiest way to do that is to do a timeline. Here's something else that I want to show, this EV revolution in 5 charts and not too many numbers. I do like this. It's a couple years old, but it is really nicely done. And here's what we're seeing. And there are a few things to know here. Look at the curves over time. These are classic S curves in innovation. If you're working in the innovation space or you are an inventor, you sort of understand already how these work. Growth tends to happen slowly and then begins to accelerate quickly. You notice that in lots of other parts of the world, Norway, Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, the Scandinavian countries, especially in China, that growth in EV market share is spiking and has grown very, very quickly. Now, we certainly understand, hey, that is a lot of government mandates and things that we don't necessarily do in the United States. I think what is also important to understand is not only taking a look at that broad trend line for whatever innovation you're thinking of, but understanding that the United States is not the center of the universe. There are lots of other countries on the globe, and lots of them have very different ideas about what's going on. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but as you think about your invention or innovation, it is critical to understand that not everybody thinks the same way you do, and not everyone in all countries, in all places on Earth, see things the same way. So it's important to pull out that trend line and pull out that trend line for different buyers in different areas of the world, especially if you're thinking about going global, but especially if you're thinking about selling to different groups of people. It's important that you understand that there are differences and that you chart those differences and you see where they are on their own adoption curve. What this one is showing is the forecasts keep revising upward, and that the prices are coming down generally. A lot of that has been driven by BYD in China, but even Tesla prices are coming down, Hyundai prices are coming down, VW prices are coming down, all the major places. Major manufacturers of EVs, the prices are dropping to the point where they're predicting this is sticker price parity, meaning that most places in the United States will get to sticker price parity this year, and in many cases already have done so. Whenever you see one S curve growing, there's almost always another S curve in the opposite direction. So make sure you're thinking about that. Whatever product you are thinking about, the category you're in, if it's growing quickly, know that there is another category that's going to be fighting you on the way down, and it's not going to go without a fight. So you need to think about that. As the curve accelerates, the other curve is going to decelerate by almost the same amount in many cases. So you need to be prepared at that point for much stiffer competition. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the United States with EVs. As ICE, it stands for internal combustion engine, not the other thing you're thinking. As that declines quickly, you see pushback from the motorheads out there on not wanting to give that up. You can see that continue to happen, though. Notice that this trend line and the latest data that I looked at is showing this trend line continuing. It hasn't slowed down. Internal combustion adoption is dropping, EV adoption is growing, and those two are likely to cross sometime in the next few years, depending on where this triangle or this diamond ends up. But they will cross, and that tends to be when the curves dramatically accelerate. So do keep that in mind. This one relates to anything made with oil. Now, oil, obviously, we think about that in terms of gasoline in our cars, but that's not the only thing oil gets into. And you'll notice from all the plastics people kind of losing their minds over the last few months with the demand squeezed in the Strait of Hormuz, that oil demand impacts lots of other products, not just gasoline. So you'll notice here, though, as EV adoption increases over the next 10 years, and as that fleet grows as a proportion of all vehicles and in raw numbers, you'll notice that oil demand will decrease over time. And that's driven by two factors. One, EVs, but two, as internal combustion engine efficiency increases to compete with that, you'll notice that oil demand will get squeezed from both sides. So when we talk about where oil is going to be redirected and how will prices fluctuate for whatever product you might be working on, that can be over the next 10 years, the likelihood of oil prices dropping is certainly a possibility, especially as oil demand from cars drops. So again, as we take a look at the timeline, and this is the number one thing you can do as an innovator to really think about time in a more constructive way, always look at longer term trend lines. Make sure that your date, today's date, is right in the middle of the chart. Look as far back as you can, look as far forward as you can. Obviously, what happens in the future is bound by lots of different factors, but what happened in the past is a good way to understand what that trend line is doing, and especially when we get accelerating S-curves like we see here. S-curves are just about as keenly predictable as almost anything in innovation. We see that happen all the time. Now, does that mean that your product specifically will succeed? No, but is the market carrying you up or is the market carrying you down? Important to understand where you are, where your innovation category. So if you make, a Ferrari Luce, the category is all EVs. Now, the Ferrari Luce may not succeed, but all EVs are going to succeed over time. That's the first way to look at time. That's more of a chronological way. And if you just do that, you're in really good shape. The second thing to look at is what I'd call sequential time. That is the things that happen over time and kind of the sequences that people are responding to. This is Scott Wasper. He says, the Ferrari Luce is ugly and Ferrari doesn't care. Neither should you. That's, I think, a little way of a provocative way to say it. I don't think the designers at Ferrari think their car is ugly. I think that do they care about it is a little bit neither here nor there. He says that it looks like a Nissan Leaf that took itself too seriously. I like the toaster comparison better. Enzo Ferrari would be rolling in his grave. Reddit called it a Waymo. Someone on X asked if it's a Temu bundle. Again, whenever your emotions get caught up in things like this, remember that's exactly, they're trying to get you to kind of agree with them. It's a psychological technique. if I get you to agree with me up front by stating something funny and interesting and clever, you will accept the rest of my arguments with a lot less question. We're not going to do that here. That said, his whole point is that, and I'm going to read a little bit here, the Luce exists because it has to, not because some executive had a vision, not because Ferrari's customer base was clamoring for a 5-seat electric sedan. It exists because the EU's emissions regulations, specifically the CAFE standards that came into full effect in 2025, require automakers to hit a fleet average of 93.6 grams of CO2 per kilometer for across every car they sell. The point is, if Ferrari mostly makes V12s, gas guzzling, super fast, throaty, aggressive cars, and they only build 14,000 cars a year, which is about right, that if they build some of these electric cars and you have the electric cars and all the gas cars, the internal combustion engines, and you flatten the curve out, the very carbon spewing internal combustion engines will be balanced by the much comparatively fewer EVs that Ferrari may sell because they essentially emit zero carbon. Now, this is they're not really counting the carbon that you would be, the carbon from the manufacturing process itself, which is one of the many reasons why some of these standards are troublesome. But neither here nor there. We're not here to debate the validity of CAFE standards, just simply that notice this. They came into full effect in 2025. Why would Ferrari do this in 2025 versus waiting to launch their product? Keep in mind that cars don't get designed and built, they're not vibe coded. Vehicles spend 5 to 7 years in development often, sometimes longer. So 5 to 7 years ago was 2018, 2019. The idea behind EVs was much more exciting and popular then, and we'll get to perceptual time in a minute. The whole point is that this has been in development for a while. So to release it now was a key move in the sequence of making sure that they could meet those CAFE standards in the first year they went into full effect in 2026. So this is key. You need to understand those kind of sequences that happen in your industry. Is there new regulation? Are there critical stages that need to be done? If you're talking about a medical device, you're always looking at when the clearances happen, the 510K clearance, the FDA clearances in the United States, or almost everywhere in the world has those stage gates and those sequences you need to go through. Make sure you understand what has to come before what, because if you didn't understand CAFE standards and when they were coming into effect, this launch would have seemed a little bizarre to you. Why wouldn't Ferrari, knowing that EVs have a little bit of a lower perception right now, why wouldn't they just wait a year, put it on the shelf? Lots of automakers do that. Why wouldn't they just wait till 2027 or 2028 to release the car? This is why they released it at this time. Important to understand that. Finally, let's talk a little bit about perceptual time. And this is something that as an inventor or innovator, you must absolutely have a bookmark at the Pew Research Center, one of the most reputable cultural research centers in the world. This one is a critical resource to understand how people feel about things. This one asks the question, and they survey and they look at this. They actually ask real people, how appealing are electric vehicles and hybrids to Americans? This is a perceptual question. This is a perceptual time question. And what's interesting about this is we can take a look at not just how popular are electric cars today, but how popular have they been over time. So let's talk about this. I'm really not interested that much in. About a third of Americans say they would very or somewhat seriously consider purchasing an electric vehicle. I don't really care about point-in-time data. In calculus, for instance, those of you who are math geeks will understand this, there are two fundamental things you look at. The slope of the curve, that's called the derivative, that tells you how fast something's moving in whatever direction, and the integral. The integral tells you how much is under that curve, so how big of a volume is it. When you're talking about innovation, you're talking about timing, derivatives beat integrals. You want to understand the trend line, not the volume right now. Both are important, but I want to understand how fast and in what direction something's moving is much more important to me than whatever's happening right now. So let's take a look at this. This is interesting from a perceptual time perspective. Look at this trend. This is the overall for US adults, from very somewhat, about 39%, 46% no, and today at about 32%. That's grown a little bit and it's shrunk and it's moderated a bit. That's about a 7-point difference. That's significant. That is statistically significant. But is it that significant in the overall grand scheme of things? Take a look at kind of the partisan divide. This is a kind of a conservative versus progressive sort of look, Republican versus Democrat. You'll notice here that 23%, so fewer people on the conservative side would look at that, 23 to 17%. I'd be surprised if that were statistically significant, probably just barely. This one, Democrat and leaning Democrat in 54 to 47. But take a look at the trend line. In May of 2024, hit its low point at 13 and 45 respectively, or 29% overall, but it's recovered and held stable. What that means, what that tells me is that there is no major driver from a perceptual perspective that's going to increase or decrease that number. That's a stable number of people, and there's still plenty of room in that adoption curve for new people to pick up that electric car or for things to change. And how do I know that? One of the other ways we can look at perception and combining that with chronological time is the obvious: age. Are younger people more likely to consider a car than older folks? And the answer obviously is yes. Usually younger people are more inclined to look at new things and new innovations on average than older folks are. Here's the thing. Who is responding to the surveys? Who is writing the articles? Who are the investors? Who are the people writing the investor articles? They tend to be people in their 50s and 60s, whereas the people considering the cars are in their 20s and 30s. When you take a look at that, those are much more likely to consider an electric car. 18 to 29 is basically at parity here. So again, really, really key understanding here. And obviously, this one at the bottom, the EV, hybrid, and gas vehicle owner, and how likely are they to consider buying one. Take a look at, if you've already owned an EV, you are 60% likely, twice as likely to buy another one. Think about that for a second. As that curve increases, and let's go back to this number here, as that curve goes up, there are more people who already own an EV than don't. The more people are in that curve, the more that 60% matters. So when we take a look at chronological, sequential, and perceptual time, what you can see really quickly is, what was Ferrari's decision? Did they really make a $5 billion mistake, as Motor Biscuit seems to imply that they are? I don't think so. I think what Ferrari has done is take a look at the overall trend line from 2015 to 2030, said EVs are a part of the future. They probably won't take over all internal combustion engine cars, but probably a majority by 2030, and by 2040, probably a 80-20 will be electric to gas, fleet-wide over the entire world. Ferrari is a global brand. They need to be selling into the global environment. Very specifically, from a sequential perspective, they understood that CAFE standards in the EU have clicked in, and they're only going to get more stringent, and those regulations in many parts of the world will only become more strict as time goes on. And then finally, if you want to just take a look at the American side of this, the EV market is stable as far as the perceptual time. It's not getting better. It's not getting worse. So again, when you take a look and put a temporal critical thinking lens on any invention or innovation that you're thinking of, Those are the three critical things you can do to ensure that you are not getting swept up by, frankly, silliness and bad takes that you're going to find on the internet. So, what are your thoughts on the Ferrari Luce? And don't tell me it looks like a toaster. At least pick a good toaster if you're going to do that. Sound off in the comments. And if you've got an idea for another car or another new product that you think would be cool to look at in this way, drop that in the comments as well. And I will cover that in another video. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.